Tonight we are celebrating the growing cosmos of Cambodian American literature. I'm very honored to be in Long Beach today, and especially in the presence of so many artists and scholars and our beloved elders and family members and friends. So thank you for joining us for this very special occasion as we also commemorate the 50th anniversary of Southeast Asian refugee resettlement, specifically that of the Cambodian community. As we reflect on the last 5 decades, I also want to acknowledge that we are also living in deeply challenging times as we fight against ICE and the deportation of our loved ones, as we process the conflict at the Cambodian side border and witness the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, Sudan, and the Congo. May this event embolden us as a community to dare to imagine the world we want to live in. So the theme of this event is world building. As writers, we use language as a portal to the past, present, and future. Our featured guests are writers who I deeply admire because they write to challenge and nurture the ongoing conversation about the Cambodian American identity. They express our unique differences in different parts of this country and tell the kinds of stories that we want to share about our community. They are creating the cosmos. So we will have readings by our guests this evening, a conversation among the writers, and then a Q&A. So I want all of you to think of questions throughout this event that you want to ask the writers at the very end. I also want to make sure that everyone here knows that we are recording this event for the archives protocol. And I'm just very honored, and thank you all so much for being here and joining me and coming from different parts of the country, from Texas, from California, from New York City, everyone, thank you. So to kick off our event, I'm going to read a poem by Joy Harjo called For Keeps to set the tone. For keeps. Sun makes the day new. Tiny green plants emerge from earth. Birds are singing the sky its voice. There is nowhere else I want to be but here. I lean into the rhythm of your heart to see where it will take us. We gallop into a warm southern wind. I link my legs to yours and we ride together toward the ancient encampments of our relatives. Where have you been, they ask, and what has taken you so long? That night after eating, singing, and dancing, we lay together under the stars. We know ourselves to be part of a mystery. It is unspeakable. It is everlasting. It is for keeps. And now I would like to introduce our first guest, April Lim. April Lim is a Jew-Cambodian American writer from Houston, Texas. She has received fellowships and scholarships from Tin House, Kenyon Review Writers Workshop, The Watering Hole, and elsewhere. Her writing has appeared in Honey Literary Suite, A Literary Confession, The Rumpus, and elsewhere. She has an MFA in poetry. She is currently a Fulbright Research Fellow in Cambodia and just returned.
Thank you so much. I have a short essay and a poem for you. Relative. If you ask me where my ancestors were originally from, I'd say Sultan. Sultan being the Teochew pronunciation of Shantou. Sultan comes from the Teochew word Su, mountain, and Tao, head, to mean mountain head. If you ask my late grandmother where she was born, she'd say Cambodia. Cambodia comes from the Pali word Kambuja, Kambu, gold, and Ja, land, to mean born in a land of gold, or born from gold, or born golden. I didn't know how to identify growing up. I knew we were Chinese, but not mainland Chinese, not the Mandarin or Cantonese-speaking Chinese people expected. Whenever I was asked what I was, I would unconfidently say that I was Chinese, but my parents were from Cambodia. My answer immediately to whomever asked, usually a white person, who only anticipated one straight answer. The idea of multi-generational diaspora was something I wouldn't come across in my American public education. It wasn't until late high school when my eldest sister, who did her own research, would tell me, "We're diaCRITICS. We speak diaCRITICS. Our ancestors are from Montreal, but immigrated to Cambodia generations ago. A lot of diaCRITICS people live in Cambodia." From then on, I would tell people I was Chinese Cambodian. Two cultures playing tag with one another, but I would never know which one was it. My parents, despite being from Cambodia, never spoke Khmer with me. I grew up neither being able to speak nor understand. Other Cambodian Americans my age could at least understand. My parents chose to speak diaCRITICS with me instead. I dialect French and the Mainland Chinese language similar to indigenous Chinese. For my parents, it was more important for me to think that I was Chinese more than Cambodian. There's a way of them classifying us as better than other Cambodians. This reflected in my mother's beauty standards for Veasna as well. She wanted me pale as the moon, but I was born with my mother's gold skin instead. However, this didn't stop her. She tediously complained about my playing outside, my dark skin, how ugly it was. And as a child who wanted love, I gave in to my mother's manipulation. I hid from the sun, no longer played outside, and scrubbed my arms raw using the papaya soap marketed for skin whitening that she bought me. I still remember how dry the soap made my skin feel, how I got cracks and spread across my body. In college, I lived on campus away from my parents for the first time. There I had the opportunity to befriend other Asians, specifically Southeast Asians, for the first time. There I learned to be proud of my cultures, both of them. I stopped hiding from the sun. I stopped trying to white off something meant to be golden. Although I learned more about my cultures, I still felt disconnected from being Cambodian, despite weighing it so heavy in my identity. Cambodia was where my parents were born, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. That's where our oral history stops. The rest of our known family lineage was lost during the genocide, but the people we knew. My parents were refugees from the Cambodian genocide. In a way, they still are, and captured by PTSD and the hollow echoes of what if. I see it in my mother's eyes when she remembers the things she wishes to forget. I hear it in my father's voice when he tells me another childhood story, an inescapable trauma that bleeds into me. I often think about what was stolen from them, what was stolen from Cambodia, what was stolen from me. My reconnection to Cambodia was a treasure I was desperate to find. In 2023, I realized all my thoughts about Cambodia were casted in the shadows of my parents' memories. Cambodia was a scary place to me, a place where all my family's trauma is buried, but I knew I could never fully write about Cambodia if I never had my own memories there. So in September 2024, I moved to Cambodia on a Fulbright research grant. It was set for 10 months. It was my first time to visit Cambodia. I had never been there before to consider it being back, but that was the only way I could describe it to people. I was finally back. I had no expectations of the country. I came in with the mindset to accept whatever would come my way. My arrival there coincided with the return of stolen artifacts from the Met to the National Museum of Cambodia, a homecoming, a celebration. At 29 years old, I was a relic returning to my motherland. But there was no welcome party, no prayer ceremony, no blessings from the monks. Just me and my tuk-tuk driver whizzing through the empty night of the Inn to my hotel. There's an interesting thing with language. To say you're from or descend from Cambodia, you can say you're Cambodian or you're Khmer. Cambodian is associated more with nationality, but Khmer meant you were blood. With all my work going into my internal journey to reconnect with my motherland, I finally felt Cambodian, but never did I think I would feel Khmer. Initially arriving, I thought my Americanness would be obvious. I wore a gold septum ring, much to the chagrin of my mother, and was told my entire life that I didn't look Khmer enough by my own relatives due to my Chinese lineage. But to my surprise, every Khmer person I met in Phnom Penh took one look at me and spoke Khmer automatically. And then, after realizing I was an American who couldn't understand Khmer, would quickly apologize and say they thought I was a local. You look like me, I look like you, one woman laughed, comparing her able arm to my own. I was faced with a new identity crisis. I was prepared to be brushed off as an American. I wasn't prepared to be accepted as a Khmer. The locals in my area got to recognize me for my yellow flowered fanny pack strapped across my chest. I bought it several years ago from Amazon and took it with me everywhere. It's rougeole color, very Khmer, a friend tried to explain. The rougeole is the national flower of Cambodia, a deep yellow gold with 3 petals and a bell-like center, both eye-catching in color and its natural geometric bloom. We love this color here, my friend continued. You'll find rougeole everywhere in Cambodia. But you won't find it anywhere in America. The soil is not fit to grow rougeole flowers. I know because my mother finds every other yellow flower possible to fill her yards in Houston, to bring Cambodia to her. Goda, known as Sok Island, is located slightly north of Phnom Penh. On Sok Island live multiple families of weavers who hold the generational knowledge of traditional Khmer silk weaving. They live in still houses where their looms nestle beneath them. While on a tour of the island, I asked the tour guide how Khmer silk is different than Chinese silk. He told me it's because of what the silk worms eat. The life cycle of the worms in China and Cambodia are the same, but because of how Cambodian soil nourishes the mulberry trees, whose leaves are then eaten by the silkworm, fluffy yellow cocoons emerge in blue or white ones. Once boiled and spun, the silk gains a deep golden sheen. Cambodian soil must be magic. It makes everything gold. I am still learning how to be Khmer. As I write this, I can hear my community of Khmer American names tell me, girl, you don't need to learn, you already are. And I know they're right, but a big part of me will never be satisfied with how much knowledge I'm missing, how many traditions I don't know, how much is still waiting to be rediscovered. I'm a relative after all. Finally returned to her homeland, settling back into this golden soil. I just have a poem. Since Junben starts tomorrow, I have a poem called Junben Nocturne. Lunar phases mark this time, 15 days and 15 nights. The sun's first beams still hours to come, yet morning arrives in waves. Ornate yourself in white, say welcome to those before us. Light the candles, burn the incense, allow the smoke to surround you. We have come to say hello, thank you, remember my favorite dish. Remember to thank the monks for their blessing. Pile of food held high in styrofoam and rice steam. Your mother presents you and only you to the eldest monk. Junior stool and bow onto the floor 3 times, bend with body and all, the blue-gray carpet embracing your homage. On the final bow, you feel the glamorous air hold its applause. The final bell has rung, the mic set down. Now is when festival turns to feast. Unwrapped limbs and banana leaves, bear its sweet coconut and sticky rice dimpled from mother's hands. Its chewy whispers will make you forget the static coming free from previously tucked away. Another visit has passed. Wonder how many ancestors made way this 10th month. This is the season of harvest and reunion, the night of bells and chant prayer and karaoke. The censer holds nothing but moonlight, prayers risen songs ago. Now only laughter holds you. Trade goodbyes in the late of night. Saran wrap the offering for tomorrow's supper. Thank you.
Is this my first? This is my first. Okay, great. Thank you so much, April, for that reading. Thank you for sharing about Cambodia and also for reading us a nocturne poem. The next reader is Vichet Chum. He is a New York City-based writer from Carrollton, Texas. He has received the 2023 Lucille Boger Service Award, 2018 Princess Grace Award in Playwriting with New Dramatists, the 2021 Lawrence Hatcher Award, and a 2021 Edgerton Foundation New Play Award for the world premiere of his play Bald Sisters, which premiered at Steppenwolf Theater in 2022, and a special state citation from the Massachusetts House of Representatives for his play Kundiman at Merrimack Repertory Theater in 2018. He is currently an underground fellow at Roundabout Theater Company, a usual suspect at New York Theater Workshop, a fellow at Sun Valley Writers Conference, a board member of the New Harmony Project, and a steering committee member for the Obie Award and Tony Award-winning organization APAC, the Asian American Performers Action Coalition. Vichet's debut novel, Queen, was released in 2023 with Quill Tree Books. Let's give it up for Vichet.
I just want to say thank you all for coming. I feel such gratitude, and I know we'll talk in a second, but I feel very overwhelmed, very full right now. So, thank you. So I have two excerpts. One is from a play. Actually, sorry, let me take a step back. I always get ahead of myself. Just in terms of like the selection, is this working? Okay, this is working. Just in terms of the selections of pieces that I wanted to share, I was thinking about Monica's prompt, creating the cosmos, and the way in which I wanted to choose the pieces to share tonight. I thought about two things. The first being the way we as writers in the creative process find the cosmos within ourselves, within our communities, within our own little universes, the ways in which if we set that intention, our worlds are little universes unto themselves. And then the second way I chose to respond to Monica's beautiful prompt was just like the audacity, the assignment for us to create the cosmos. How intense that task feels in a lot of ways, but the ways in which we continue to push ourselves as writers, as artists, as creators, to find the breadth of what it means to create the cosmos. So I have two excerpts, the first one being from a play called Liebling, which means darling or sweetie in German. This is an excerpt from a story in which a young Cambodian writer is navigating his own mortality, but also reckoning with the legacy of his family's mortality as well, and their survival. So this is from that. When he stepped out of the office, he immediately thought about when his parents died, and how she didn't call him. She didn't make his mother salam a Jew and patronize him with half-baked wisdoms about life, death, and grief. She didn't brush the hair out of his face. I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm getting feedback. I'm not sure what's happening. She didn't brush the hair out of his face and say, "It'll be all right." As he recalled, she picked him up from school. It was a Friday. He had a debate tournament in Grapevine, and he was supposed to take the bus with the rest of the students. But in a brief text message, she communicated, "I'm taking you now." He waited behind the school outside the fine arts hallway where the other sweaty kids rattled off until their parents retrieved them. He himself was also perspiring from the oversized men's warehouse suit he had put on in the last period in preparation for the tournament ahead. The white Toyota Corolla rolled up, and he could see she wasn't giving too much away. But there was information to be shared. It rested on her downcast gaze. She jumped into the passenger seat, and just like that, she said, "Mom and Dad got hit by a drunk driver during lunch. I'm sorry. You can come home, but I strongly suggest I drive you to your tournament." He blinked once. His eyes began to well. She wiped the first round of tears and said without any perceivable sentiment, "Darling, we were made for this." It doesn't just stop because our history is already so sad. Something sadder will come along. He looked back at her with envy that she could communicate with such astonishing clarity. We were made for this. Can someone be made for such sadness? He nodded, even though at that very moment he did have a surprising hunger for a bowl of his mother's so chewed. He nodded and said, okay, let's go. And so they drove to the tournament, and he won first place in the Lincoln Douglas debate. It wasn't surprising, he was competitive at what he did, and yes, there was a newfound fire in him. When he reached the finish line, he could almost make out a mirage of his parents, applauding, celebrating his impossible victory. But of course, it was his sister. While she could have gone home, she hopped from the TGI Fridays to the Old Navy to the Ulta Beauty and back again, buying time and making sure he ultimately felt her own presence, even if she loathed the baby in. For a moment, they locked eyes. And while it could have been reassuring, they instead understood only what these two siblings could understand. Darling, we were made for this. He tried to remember those words when he walked onto the train platform. And when he couldn't listen to the music on the A train on his long slide up to the tippy top of Manhattan. And when he walked through Fort Tryon Park in search of a little more time and calmer views. And when he got a $6 iced coffee and thought, oh well, fuck it. And when he dragged himself up that slight but painful incline through Isham Park, but honestly loved to see the kids terrorize their parents with water balloons. And when he entered the building, moving past the woman who planted wilted hydrangeas out front and didn't even give a shit. When he turned the key and put all his weight into the heavy door to really earn his journey home. And when his lover looked up for making goulash for dinner. And when the lover asked how his day was. And when the lover noticed he was remarkably pensive. And when he finally tried to say something, he tried to remember those words. That was my first excerpt. And then my second excerpt is pretty quick, but it's the opening of my book, Queen. It's about a young queer Cambodian girl who lives in Lowell, Massachusetts. Her father's just been deported to Khmer Rouge, and she's using poetry as a means to sort of articulate her new reality. This is some. Set on selfie like she's even got a clue about that red light flashing hot bright. What's she gonna say when she's some kind of way? What's she gonna do after what she's been through? She's not looking for a tear from the avatars up here. She doesn't even know who's hooked onto this flow. But she's out on the limb while things are looking dim, and she needs something to do when her life is feeling new. You see, she's got these yellow, brown blues, those jungle Asian hues of not feeling right when you're always in the fight. To prove your worth on this stolen earth, that yours are as equal as the thieving sequel. Settlers, that is, who once made commands, and without regard took over these lands, and decided to decide who continue to belong, as long as the notes are right for their song. Even if you hear sounds of bombs throughout the night, an inherited memory of a shared historical fight to escape the war that just seems to keep going, making an ever so bleak the endeavor of growing. Ooh, she's touched a nerve. And now she's looking to swerve because she's trying to work through what she knows she cannot undo. The feelings are too hot, even more than she thought, when she put up this phone to speak on the Kundiman. What she does know is this, that she's looking to not miss the chance to speak out when she's wanting to shout those yellow, brown blues, those jungle Asian views of feeling not right when you're always in the fight. And so, the time keeps going, even as her thoughts are slowing. The self-view is waiting for the speaker to keep creating. The red light keeps blinking, and she keeps on thinking about the prayer she is making that will keep her from breaking. What's she gonna say when she's some kind of way? What's she gonna do after what she's been through? Dear self-view, who's even got a clue about that red light flashing hot bright?
next reader is Veasna Has, a nonfiction writer whose personal essays explore themes of family and cultural identity. She was a 2024 Periplus Fellow, an alum of the Tin House Summer Workshop, and a wedding cake house artist in residence. She has been supported by Kundiman and the Mendocino Writers Conference and has been published in diaCRITICS and Slant'd, among others. She's currently at work on a memoir-in-essays. Born and raised in Long Beach, California, she is a proud graduate of Long Beach Poly High School. She now calls Queens, New York City home.
Thank you. So nice to be home. Thank you, Monica, for organizing it. I will be reading from an essay that I wrote last year about a grocery store that used to be here. The automatic sliding doors of the grocery store were where my mom and I would part ways. Large sacks of rice were stacked at the entrance, my mom's first pit stop to assess the price of that season's jasmine crop. I'd leave her there, weaving through the checkout stands and making a beeline to the prepared snacks section. These were the ready-to-eat foods, fried spring rolls or fish cakes on yellow styrofoam trays covered in thin wrap, incubating on shelves under a heat lamp. The flat fried butter fish cakes with tangy dipping sauce were my favorite. From there, I'd snake along the edge of the store to browse the cold beverages, looking for a can of soy milk as a sweet treat. Then came the produce section, where I usually went to my mom and dig through vegetables to prepare soup, while I eyed the boxes of ramen bowls overhead, hoping for some microwavable nonfiction spicing. I'd drop off my goods into her shopping basket before heading to the meat butcher at the back wall, where my sister and I would watch the live blue crabs wriggling and pinching in an open cardboard box, mere feet away from us. I was living in New York City in November of 2018 when I first learned that the Kundiman supermarket was being threatened with closure. The 22-year-old store had received a 2-week notice. The property owners were seeking approval to demolish the East Anaheim Plaza strip mall, which housed Kundiman and a dozen other small businesses, to make way for a multi-tenant property with a drive-thru. The filing for the public hearing had been submitted in July of that year, but Kundiman's owners had been notified in November about a meeting less than a month away. I was stunned. Kundiman could only be described as a staple for the Cambodian American community in Long Beach, the largest refugee community of its kind in the United States, and in fact, the largest concentration of Cambodians in the world outside of Cambodia itself. For it to close was a big enough loss, but for their hands to be forced by real estate developers with such notice was insulting. I called my sister Kundiman, who still lived in Long Beach, along with my other sister and parents. She had heard that a petition was in the works to delay the hearing, so I feebly kept an eye out for that update on what little action I could take from across the country. In 2007, a 1.2-mile stretch of Anaheim Street was officially designated as Cambodia Town, but we had always known it as the corridor of Long Beach where we find the most Cambodian-owned businesses. There were also a lot of Vietnamese and Latinx-owned shops, a true snapshot of the diversity of Long Beach. It felt lively, and even a bit grungy, and like a lifeline for so many communities. My family always lived a 10-minute drive or less from Anaheim Street, so it was a regular weekend destination. We'd go for the dollar store, photo portrait studio, jeweler, my Cambodian classical dance classes, a dentist I hated, grocery stores, and more. Kundiman was the main anchor business of the East Anaheim Plaza strip mall, which covered 2 commercial blocks on Anaheim Street. It was usually the final stop on our outings before we returned home. If any of the other shops we visited didn't have exactly what we needed, we'd be sure to find it at Kundiman. Perpendicular to the East Anaheim Plaza on Atlantic was the Poly Plaza, named after my high school a block away. The strip mall also housed a number of Cambodian businesses, including Alum, a banquet restaurant popular for parties and wedding dinners. A few doors down was a video rental store that we frequented with my dad, taking advantage of an unofficial Monica discount where films were just $1 to rent for us. The owner's wife ran the water distillery next door, which we also used, filling up giant clear blue jugs for a water dispenser I don't even remember us owning. I wanted these shopping outings to last as long as possible because being out and about made it feel like something was happening in our lives. As we moved from store to store, there was always the possibility we'd run into someone we knew or even meet someone new. It felt like being a part of something bigger, I thought, not quite knowing to name it as community then. When we weren't going on these excursions, our lives felt sedentary. Not having much money, we didn't travel often or at all. Sometimes we'd have picnics in the park with another family, and more regularly, we'd make a stop at the public library. Generally wary of others, my parents didn't let my siblings and me go to our friends' houses just to socialize. It got tiresome to explain to friends why my life outside school had to be so limited. Veasna's parents are really strict, became the go-to line for everyone when my absence had to be explained. The map of my life in Long Beach thus centered primarily around our home, the library, our schools, and Anaheim Street. My parents and my 3 older siblings originally landed in Seattle in 1987, where they had been sponsored by another Cambodian family. After a year living in the Pacific Northwest, they moved 1,000 miles down to Long Beach, where they found sunnier skies, familiar-looking palm trees, and even more Cambodian refugees who were also trying to make new homes. I liked observing my mom talking to fellow Khmer people as she ran her errands. At Kundiman, she made small talk with the workers and fellow shoppers as if she knew them. She must have gotten to over time. She would also run into people she did actually know, parents of girls with whom I was taking dance lessons, and occasionally people she recognized from Cambodia or from the refugee camps in Thailand or the Philippines. These were fascinating encounters, with people tracing their long journeys together while casually picking through bundles of lime leaves or browsing for fish stocks. I realize now that these scenes were a welcome contrast to observing my parents in other predominantly white spaces, and to my anxiety and embarrassment for them rarely fumbling through those settings. Kundiman, instead, provided a sense of relief, like an extension of a home. Like a true home, Kundiman also functioned as a safe space. In most other establishments, my mom would expect me to always stay close to her, but at Kundiman, I knew I had carte blanche to essentially disappear as soon as we entered. She knew I couldn't go far and probably could have found her the salty snacks. One time, I did get lost in the store, or rather, my family had left for our car without me. I was around 8, so I knew enough to not truly panic as I rushed past aisle after aisle, hoping to spot someone. It didn't take long for my mom to run back into the store, kissed, grabbing me by my hair while yelling at me for wandering off. The stress of it all prompted me to cry and my nose to bleed, which added to the chaos. I'd later know to me that anger is fear of the loss that could have been. It was the same fear that drove my parents' overbearingly rigid approach to sheltering us. They trusted us, but they didn't really know the other kids we hung out with or their parents. So rather than risk something or someone happening to us, they chose to control what they could, meaning the physical confines of our lives and reach in Long Beach. Thank you.
Our final reader for tonight is Layhannara Tep. Yes. I'm just trying to make sure the speaker is okay. Layhannara Tep was born and raised in Long Beach, California. She's the daughter of Cambodian refugees, an experience that continues to shape her writing. She's working on a collection of short stories about the Cambodian American diaspora in Long Beach. Give it up for that. Her work is interested in addressing historical erasure and examining the ways that fiction can help us reconcile gaps and imagine more. Layhannara earned her MA in Asian American Studies from UCLA and an MFA in fiction from NYU. Her work can be found in Asterix Journal and the Hopkins Review. Let's give it up for Layhannara.
Thank you for coming tonight. Okay, I just goes in and out is what I'm learning. So you may won't hear part of my story, and that's fine. Welcome everyone for coming. It's very nice to read at home. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from my short story called Slant'd, which also means older sister. I feel like this is the crowd where I may not have to translate it. This is a short story that takes place in the 90s and it's about an unlikely friendship. I ate at Northwest Noodle Shack every Tuesday morning to avoid the weekend crowd. There were really only 3 tables, and you either ordered takeout or you went when everyone else was at work. That morning, right after my husband Sok left for his 7 a.m. shift at the garage, and our 2 kids, Nina and Sam, boarded the 7:30 a.m. school bus, I locked the door behind me and crossed the street. I finally had a moment alone that didn't involve sewing. Even though it was October 1st and I had only 9 months left to save up for Nina's new car, I still allowed myself this 1 weekly indulgence. I was halfway through my noodle soup, so close to eating one of the 3 fish balls that I always save for the end, that I didn't even see her walk in at first. I continued to dress my noodles, adding more sriracha, a little more hoisin, and a squeeze of lime with each bite. The last bit of Chinese donut absorbed just enough of the soup, a moment between crispy and soggy that meant it was ready to eat. I spooned it into my mouth and slurped the noodles. I didn't care what anyone said. This was more therapeutic than any of that sauna mess my friends were always rattling on about. Why spend money on steam from the spot when you can put your face close to a bowl of freshly ladled beef bone soup? The broth piping hot, the steam rising to greet your whole face. When I looked up, I recognized my neighbor Boy's new wife at the counter. New, because the first wife he sponsored from Cambodia left him a year ago, after he also sponsored her blue job, her plump lips, and her new nose. She met a richer man while working at a casino in Hawaiian Gardens and mailed divorce papers home. I didn't blame her. Bori was 15 years older and wasn't exactly the nicest person. He had a face that matched his manners. Deep brown lines cut across his forehead the way he often cut my husband off on the streets, just before PCH intersects Cherry Avenue. His eyes were clouded and permanently bloodshot from the late hours he used to beat donuts into shape before he made enough money to buy the shop outright and hire an overnight baker. Even then, he never blinked. Those wide, unapologetic eyes stared from the better parking spot, from where he waited to smirk hello to my husband before turning in for the evening, while I watched from the window. In all the years we've lived across from each other, I've only run into him once at the Theravada Buddhist temple on Little Street. He didn't bring any of the customary food or monetary offerings. Instead, he came empty-handed and tried to leave but a year's worth of blessings. But his wife left him later that same year, and I never saw him at the temple again. When Bori brought his new wife home 3 days ago, he walked in front of her as she trailed behind, struggling to roll a bulky black suitcase with all her possessions. What I first noticed was how much blush she had on her face. Her cheeks were so pink. She had on red lipstick and her hair was freshly permed, falling in perfect coils around her face. She was trying to look older, but I could tell she was in her early 20s, around the same age my sister Rena was at the time of her death. The new wife must have noticed me watching her through the window, because she paused to smile in my direction. I quickly shut my curtains and looked away. The less I knew, the better. I didn't want to give Bori a reason to interrogate me after she too left him. Today, I noticed she wasn't wearing any makeup. Her bare face would have been almost unrecognizable had it not been for her perm, the coils unmistakable. I looked down and continued slurping my noodles before she could realize I recognized her. I could hear her timid voice grow more confident when she learned the waiter also spoke mine. "Can I order congealed pork blood porridge with extra bean spots to go?" she said before sitting down at a table within my mind and vision. I had no choice but to say hello. She immediately rose and walked toward me as if my greeting had signaled an invitation. "You live in the Union Crossing Mars, right?" "That's right." When she continued to look at me with expectant eyes, I asked, "What's your name?" "So yeah, Sunshine." And in fact, without all that makeup, her face did shine. "And yours?" "Opa," but I was no flower. At 41, I already felt wilted. "Can I tell you something?" Before I could respond, she answered her own question. "I saw you cross the street from my window and followed you here." "Oh." Yeah. She looked at me with the kind of earnestness I remembered seeing in Nina's eyes when she first spoke about college. These were girls whose mouths matched their minds. Girls who had yet to learn the dangers of sharing the right kind of information with the wrong kind of people. Thank goodness the waiter brought her to go over at that exact moment. But instead of getting up to leave, Sodiya pulled out a chair across from me and sat down. She undid the knot at the top of the plastic bag and assembled the porridge, even took a line from my plate. I usually don't like it when strangers act familiar, but for some reason, I didn't mind her too much. Someone who admitted to follow you wouldn't tell a lie.
Let's give it up for all of our writers. So now we're going to begin a conversation amongst ourselves, and I'm going to keep track of this time. And like I said, we'll have time for Q&A at the very end. So I'm really excited that we have 2 writers from Texas and 2 writers from California, specifically Long Beach. And I myself am a writer from Pennsylvania, so I'm a little bit of a loner over here. But I'm so curious about how you think the places you grew up in have shaped your writing or the way you think about your storytelling.
So as you all noticed, my writing was very much about the neighborhood I grew up in. Phnom Penh Noodle Shack takes up some of the real estate in my writing. I really find it really fun in my writing to kind of add texture to the community I grew up in, right? Like, I think the kind of texture I feel like I'm able to recognize as someone who lives here. I think a lot of times, you know, we also have like these different stories about our communities that, you know, we're told. And I think sometimes what made me interested in fiction is actually the stories that I've never heard before. Like, I think I have a neighbor when I was growing up who gambled a lot, right? And I was always curious about her story, like what kind of led to that? And I think that would ignite my writing in a different way and make me think about who's the person behind this, you know, what some people would see as addiction, right? And so for me, I think my surroundings really shape my imagination.
I think when I started writing, I did not intend to like specifically write about Long Beach, and all of my work does not center on that. But when I wrote the piece that I read from today, as I was trying to paint even like this scene of Anaheim Street from the 90s, as I remembered it, I really enjoyed this kind of like act of writing as a way of preservation, especially of places that aren't here anymore, specifically the grocery store, but also a bunch of other locations in Long Beach that just aren't here anymore just because of natural change. So for me, I think place and community in my hometown is definitely, I like the challenge of trying to recapture what I remember in case it might resonate with others who had that same experience of it.
I love being in Long Beach. I love being in places like Lowell, Massachusetts, where the Cambodian contingent is so much greater than the place that I grew up. Most randomly, April lives in my suburb of Texas, Carrollton, Texas now. But growing up, it was a very sort of white, homogeneous space, very suburban. And there was a small Cambodian contingent, but it was few and far between, and just geographically, it felt so disparate, it felt very separated. And so, you know, we had a community where we lived a lot, but then we would all go away from each other. And so for me, I think the way in which that's manifested in my writing is, I think all of my writing is seeking to belong. There's sort of an achy quality, I think, to some of my work. You know, for me, I'm constantly in search of community, in search of connection, in search of finding the bridges between us, because I think in many ways I felt quite siloed, and I felt like I grew up in a space that was a little bit more lonely. And so, you know, I think it's like unique to think about like that queer Cambodian kid in the suburb of Dallas being like, what's happening? Why am I here? And to me, that story finds different manifestations. As I continue to get older, I feel like there's such a breadth of stories that you can mine just out of that singular experience?
Yeah, so I say I'm from Houston, but really I'm from like a small town like outside of Houston, and it was a very predominantly white town. So we were actually the first like people of color to live on our block during that trip to the white flag that followed after. But yeah, I didn't really have like my friends growing up. I barely had any Asian friends, and so I think that made me feel like I needed to find out who I was or where I came from, and that allowed me to ask my dad a lot of questions about his childhood, because I knew my mom would talk about it, and I respect that, and my dad was more open about what happened and the stories he would tell. And so you see that a lot in my poetry. It's just the stories that my father has given me about like our family history and escaping the genocide. And with my mom, although she doesn't talk about the genocide, she's very superstitious, she's very Buddhist, she has a lot of rituals that she passes on to me. And so you can hear in like films and not hearing like the former that a lot of my mother told me what to do at temple, at law, because I don't know how to proceed with the monks. She has to tell me. And I think it's like, that's how just the lack of community, my community I grew up with, I saw it in my parents, and that really leads into my work.
Yeah. You know, I grew up in Amish country, as all of you know, and I was also very much siloed and feeling very isolated. And then I just realized that my family was my community, just the four of us, my mother, my father, my brother. And when I think about how my hometown influences my writing, you know, a lot of times farmlands are appearing in my poems. There's a lot of cornfields now, and, you know, just thinking about the ways that my brother and I would go through the cornfields at night, you know, and then the farmers, their boots would come stomping towards us and say, stop stealing my corn, you know? So it's so amazing to hear about our different experiences growing up, where we grew up. And, you know, Veasna, you talked about preservation when you read about the grocery store. And so I'm going to tie this thought back to preservation. But I spoke to a friend of mine about this term called post-apocalyptic stress syndrome, coined by the Anishinaabe scholar Lawrence W. Gross. So PASS describes the way in which the colonial might be understood as the apocalypse, and the way that such an apocalypse continues to haunt the lives of Native folks around the world. So he claims that it takes 150 years and likely longer to recover from the traumas of colonialism, and I would say for our community, genocide too, and to recover from the way that trauma haunts the very fabric of indigenous life, culture, society, psyches, ways of knowing, and ways of being. So I'm really interested in what this recovery looks like for our community 50 years after the genocide. And I think that recovery work, it has to do with preservation. And so tying it back to our conversation, I'm wondering what kinds of narratives you are actively preserving in your writing versus the narratives that you're actively breaking away from. You know, and Layhannara, you and I have talked a lot about reframing narratives too. So I'm just curious, you know, what are some ways that you're thinking about preservation in your work and then moving away from that? I'm looking at Vichet's face like, I'm stumped.
Well, no, I mean, it's a massive question. Any good answers out there? No, I mean, it's a beautifully framed question, and I think we could spend like 1,000 bottles of wine and hours talking about, but I think for me, what I try to preserve in my work is what you said, Monica, the way in which your family is your community.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think those of us who were born in this country and then progressively were told every narrative about how to assimilate and how to become Americans, there was a lot of rejection, moments of rejecting where we've come from over the years. And And only in maybe our adulthood did we say, oh, that was horrible. You know, that we were able to contextualize our trauma in some capacity. And so for me, I think that I'm trying to constantly preserve those relationships, the relationships that I'm privy to from my 39 years of life, the ways in which, you know, my family has cultivated and raised me, and have instructed me with certain values, which also, you know, I can't think about the word preservation without the word transformation as well, and I think that also makes me think of your prompt of like, what then do you sort of seek to move, what areas do you try to move away from? And the truth is, I just think that like, I try to be optimistic about writing, you know, and creating. I think at the end of the day, everyone should just write whatever, like go for it. I think the audacity to write is more powerful than anything else. And at the same time for myself, I know what I sort of am drawn towards. And, you know, I think we probably talked about this to a certain degree, and I'm curious what you all think, but I think obviously what we are constantly in conversation with is our trauma. And these narratives, sometimes not by authors of Cambodian descent, but people who sort of put trauma upon us or tell us, or tell us how we should relate to our trauma. And I also think trauma is multifaceted and diverse, and is quite the landscape. And so to me, I think maybe it's less about rejecting the idea of trauma narratives, but more so about transforming trauma narratives with like a very soft T on the trauma. Just trying to sort of, you know, look ahead at 50 more years and what is possible, and giving ourselves permission to, you know, just write whatever we need to write.
It was definitely a massive question that I can't answer myself, which is why I'm asking all of you. But, you know, just thinking about, like, reframing those narratives too, you know, and just the grocery store. Do you want to talk a little bit about, like, your relationship to Long Beach in that way? And, you know, we've discussed a little bit about, like, how that's a foreshadow of what else we might lose in the future.
Yes, okay. I think, sure, relationship to the grocery store, and I'm sure many people in this room have a lot of their own feelings about experiencing that loss. Yes, it did make me feel more appreciative of what we still do have in the community, and it also maybe kind of go down this whole rabbit hole of wanting to try to preserve the memories of all these other institutions, whether it's through my writing or just by, you know, supporting the actual businesses, or just making sure that we're still making them like lively places in this community. When it comes to the idea of like preservation in our writing or my writing, I think I just want to focus on preserving like what I intended to write in the first place, which is just my kind of personal reflections of my upbringing, now with the lens of myself being an adult and making all these connections that are new to me now that I wouldn't have known as a child, which oftentimes has nothing to do with trauma. But it is quite surprising the assumptions that people make about what I might be writing because I am Khmer and because I'm writing nonfiction. So I do kind of often find myself fighting that expectation, and I know, I'm sure we all have, but it's a very real thing, so it's kind of something wrong with that.
I think for me, when I think about what I'm trying to preserve, a lot of what inspires me to write is, I think, the spirit of the elders around me, right? I had really strong women around me growing up. I think a lot of my mom and my aunt's like spirited personalities and a lot of the characters I write. I feel like my dad shows up in my writing. I mean, they're not like exactly like in the same way that they are in there because I write fiction. But for me, it's also about looking at the ways in which their strong spirits have inspired like who I choose as the main character. So when we talk about reframing narratives, like earlier I was reading from Slant'd, which is about Opa, who is actually a seamstress. Like she sews, and I think oftentimes like there's so many amazing women in my community who sew to make ends meet and who don't get to be the main characters in the story. And I think whose stories often get sort of undermined and are seen as maybe weak sometimes, and that those are not the women I knew growing up. I knew these women, and they did what they could to make their families have dinner on the table every night, and I really wanted to kind of highlight that story and reframe it. And for me, preservation was about a very specific time that I felt like I experienced growing up with these kind of families, and you know, what it meant to kind of have these women be the main character, and what were they doing to kind of, what sort of goals that they have. They have dreams too, and I think for me it's like exciting to kind of like, you know, think about that and to put that on the page.
April, did you want to tackle that conversation about preservation?
So when I think about this, I think about like the stories my mother has given me, like truth and his truths, and how they don't always align with like the truths that are in our history books that are not written by us. And one specific thing that comes to mind is like whenever you look up the definition of boat people, they always say like, oh, it's Vietnamese people. And my father and his family were boat people. They were just like in Vietnam. After Phnom Penh fell, they went to Vietnam and then ended up being boat people. And so I'm just like, oh no, not all boat people were Vietnamese. It's just there are a lot of different refugees living in Vietnam at that time because of the general lives, you know, going on in Southeast Asia. It always bothered me that that was never like mentioned in any history books or like online, so that inspired me to write Sonnet for the Cambodian boat people, which is one of my poems. Just so that there's like a mention of the fact that they exist, and like maybe people will do a deeper dive into like, oh, like what is this? And like start to ask questions and like question like why are things set up the way that they are, and why are things written by folks that don't necessarily have a direct tie to these events.
So, in light of this conversation about like, you know, moving away from like trauma narratives or reframing our narratives and moving towards desire, like as I was listening to you all read, there were little moments where I sort of laughed a little bit, you know, I sort of chuckled a little bit, maybe because I know you, but also because some of your writing really made me laugh in a beautiful way. And I think for me, like, the one thing that if I could preserve one thing, you know, that's kind of silly to say, but one of the most important things I would preserve in our stories is our laughter. And so I really love everything that you just shared, everything that you read. And so I'm gonna give you like an easier question now too. But, you know, I want to know if you can tell us like, why do you write? Why do you write, and what is your creative process as writers? For those of, you know, in the audience who are maybe interested in writing or beginning to write, maybe they'd love to hear.
I think I write because there are only stories that I can tell with my specific experience, and like what started it all was just that, like, as I was beginning to know my family's history. I think I told you this before, maybe years ago. Like I don't remember exactly how this happened, but I got a random like Facebook message request from like a guy who was not Cambodian at all. And he was like, "Hey, I'm trying to like write stories about like survivors of the Cambodian genocide. Can I talk to your parents?" And I was like, I didn't respond to him. I was like, how did this random man find me? And how dare you have the audacity to ask me that? Because it's like my parents aren't willing to talk about it to a random stranger. And like rarely to me, so like, what makes them think that this is just okay? And I got really like mad in that moment, and I was like, if anyone is going to try and help my parents tell their stories, I would hope it would at least be me, you know, not just like some random.
Well, I love how the audience is responding to that, because it's so clear that so many people who are not in our community have taken our stories in a way that, you know, has somehow defined our identity for us. I mean, I maybe wouldn't go as far as to say that, but there is my own response as a writer, which is to reclaim those narratives and to also break away from whatever they have written about us. So I appreciate what you just shared. And also, like, we can ask each other questions too. It doesn't all have to come from me, but, you know, because I'm going to ask scary questions. You want to answer? Yes.
Why? I think, I can't even remember a time when I wasn't writing, even before I could actually write. Like, I felt like I was always making up stories. And I think a big part of that is actually my family's fault. I felt like my mom would only tell me piecemeal stories about like our family's history, and it would always come out randomly, right? And I would never, there was like no linear, I like had no idea what was happening, like what was our family history, and I also I was too young to really ask her about it, and I felt that it was a touchy subject, like that was pretty clear, right? So I felt like I was getting piecemeal stories and found that I often like kind of played with that and found myself like kind of imagining a lot, and I think that kind of really fueled my creativity. And so sometimes it was just to make sense of like my family history for myself, even if it was my own version. And so yeah, I found myself writing for that reason. And then I also felt like the more I really learned about my family's history and our people's history, like for instance, like I think it's so significant that we are, you know, reading and talking today on, you know, the 50th anniversary of our communities resettling here with the genocide. I always think about how lucky and meaning, I can't even explain, like what does it mean for us to be the survivors of this, right, and the descendants of survivors. And I felt like it was always my duty to tell the stories, right? To tell the stories of our community. It just felt that I owed that for some reason. I always felt that. So,
It's funny. You know, hello. I write. Did I switch? Hello. I like what you said about making sense of your family history. I think that really resonates with me. I think a lot of my writing is just to try to kind of, well, make sense, but also discover new things about my upbringing and this idea of being in between cultures and how that like manifests for myself. And I write just because it's the most fulfilling thing for me, and I don't need anyone else for it. It's not always enjoyable, and I'm curious if my family's going to relate, but there are moments when I make a new connection or am able to come up with like a specific reflection that is really surprising for myself. And I find myself just always chasing those kind of moments of discovery in my creating.
Yeah, I think that I have like 1,000 reasons why I write. I think I used to be an actor, and like I remember there was this one day. Can I use that one? This is my I used to be an actor, and I remember this one day I had like 5 auditions, which is like, wow, 5 auditions in one day. But it was like 3 delivery guys, a Mongolian sheep herder, and a valet attendant. And I was like, this is what people think of me, you know, this is what people think of my humanity. And you know, I think that was like over, 14, 15 years ago. I think it's gotten better, for sure, but it's still tough out on the streets. And I think the reason why I then sort of put more energy into writing and writing plays was because there was this like vacuum. There was this, or not a vacuum, actually, let me take a step back. There was just an unwillingness to receive stories of our kind, and an unwillingness to put energy into those stories. And so I think for me, I wanted to be a part of the solution. I wanted to be a part of creating ecosystems that reflected us. And so, and also like I'm an introvert usually, and so to me, writing theater gave me the opportunity to be with people, to get in a room and to devise and to create. And I think, you know, writing, sort of moving into literature a little bit, I'm like reminded of how lonely awful writing is. You know, like, it's like low-key, like not fun at times. But I think this opportunity, the way in which we get to then, once you get past that finish line, once you then get to sort of be in a room with other people who are, who connect with your work or are curious about your work, that is like the end game. You know, that is the joy you receive when you've, I don't know, like found a way to create the cosmos in your work.
Oh my God, I've ruined it. Oh God.
Do we ruin this? I think so. Testing, okay. Yeah, this mic has been a little bit faulty, so thank you everyone for your patience. You know, I have prepared so many questions, and there is one question that I'd like to maybe end with, and then I'll turn it to the audience for Q&A, but, you know, I've been thinking a lot about the word resilience or resiliency, and I feel like our community, I believe, is very resilient, and I have a complex relationship to that word still, because I believe it's a story that sometimes people impose onto our community without fully looking at, you know, how they might be complicit in the things that make us have to be resilient, how they might be complicit in a history of violence that, you know, that rendered our community into like refugeehood, right? So I'm wondering, like, what your relationship to resilience is in your work too. You know, Layhannara, like your story about Wangsaday, these two women, I've read this story before, it's wonderful. I know what happens in the end, so I can't ruin it for you all. But, but there is resilience in there too. But it comes about in a way that may not be expected, because there's a lot of tenderness. There's a lot of tenderness, and not just this story, but in all of your work. And I think that's why I'm so moved by the way that you all do lean into creating a cosmos that's outside of whatever might be expected of you as a Khmer writer. So I'm very curious, like, what's your relationship to resilience? And maybe that's something that the audience can think about too, you know, and when we mingle, you can tell us what you think, because I'm curious about everyone's thoughts in this room.
I think for me, if I were to think about the way that resilience comes out in my stories, maybe that kind of has an interest to this question. I think a lot about how resilience actually happens within a community. Like with my story in Wangsaday, it's about an unlikely friendship and the resilience that they find. And one of them maybe finds it a little bit unexpectedly from the other as well. Is only able to happen because of the vulnerabilities they're able to share with one another. And I think if they weren't able to like find that, if they weren't able to, I think, offer their resources, which I think is such a big part of our community, sharing resources. I think there's one scene specifically in my story where she teaches So yeah, how to sew, right, gives her a skill that she can take with her, right? And I think a lot about how in our communities that's what's happening. People teach each other skills, people show each other how to do things, like how to fill out forms. Like, you know, we all know one person, like one older sister who helped everybody in their own family and other families, right? So I think for me, resilience goes beyond just the one person. It's just how we are resilient as a community. And I think I've been thinking a lot about that too as a writer and what that means, because I agree with Ms. Mann, it's hard to be a writer. I think it's hard to create the cosmos when I feel like we often are not looked at as creators. Like I think being an artist is something that I didn't imagine was even possible as a Cambodian American. And I think what makes it possible is that we believe in each other. Like the fact that you all are all here, I think makes it possible for us to be here. So that has been so beautiful. So I think I'm thinking about resilience constantly in that sense too.
Yeah, I'll just say that. Is it on? Hello? Check.
Sorry.
Check. It's gone.
She took it.
I'll just speak loudly.
She took it.
She took it. She took away. Okay. I'll just speak loudly.
Wait, is it? Are you sure it's not on though?
It's dead.
I think it's dead.
Is it
I think
dead?
it's dead, so.
Okay, we want it to be recorded.
The mic was not resilient.
The mic was not resilient, but we will be resilient.
Welcome to my death.
Check 1, check 2. Nope, this is dead too. Hello.
Is that
Check,
dead?
check.
No,
Okay.
it's working.
Oh, there we are. One thing that I have always felt when non-Cambodian people talk about Cambodian people, it's always, they are so resilient and so kind. And the way in which that completely flattens our humanity to these things in which they can then sort of perceive us in one way and then also not recognize their complicity in that making of a narrative. And so to me, it's complicated because resiliency comes with so much. It comes with a cost, an enormous cost. And I think it is true. We are resilient. That's just true. But I think it is, again, about redefining it for yourself individually and for us as a collective as well. And I agree completely with what you say. I think in our community, I see the way in which we support each other, the way we hold each other up. And then I also think in this moment in time, I think it's really important that we also support each other across other communities as well. We are watching genocide happen right now, and I feel it in my body every day. I feel it in what we've inherited, and I think it's really important to continue to reach across communities and recognize the humanity of one another. To me, that's resiliency.
So for me, the word resilience will always be tied to the word survival. I don't think we can have one without the other. And I think that we've been able to be resilient through community because that's really what all it is. I think, like my parents and some of their generation, they still have this distrust of other Khmer people because of how survival shaped during the genocide and the unfortunate things that had to happen. But I think that's fortunately being transformed in such a major level. Until 2 weeks ago, I was living in Cambodia and I was in Siem Reap whenever the border conflict with Thailand began to happen. And so we were getting all of these refugees from the border, and we're trying to find them places to live, designating walks and unofficial camps, official camps, and all of these things. And there are a lot of grassroots movements just to buy supplies, just to people who can drive all of these cars to Slant'd or Gok, all of these places an hour out of Siem Reap, more than an hour out of Siem Reap. It's you really saw the community come together. I was going Salud, which is like the market there, to buy donations because like friends and family sent me money. I'm very grateful to buy donations for the refugees, and like even there, usually there's like a back and forth where it's like, you know, like partners are there, whenever it's like I'm buying donations, supplies for refugees to donate, they automatically gave me like the lowest price. They're just like, this is for donations, this is the lowest price they can do. And like giving me even more discounts, like if I buy, you know, this much, or even like this lower. But like I knew that it was like the lowest price because I asked my teachers first, so just in case. But like even like that community, like they knew like they wanted to help out because they knew like where Cambodia used to be and where how Cambodia was used to be in a situation where unfortunately they couldn't help each other out. But now that community that lives there right now is so resilient that the survival will be stronger.
Oh, I turned it off accidentally. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great note to end our conversation. Does anybody in the audience have any questions? We might be able to take maybe 2 or 3 questions. Anyone? Okay, I'm going to come to you.
Hello.
Wait, can you stand over here because the camera? Yeah.
Thank you to the 4 of you for sharing your personal stories. And my question is, they are very
Hello? Somebody turn me off.
It's a very faulty mic.
Hello? I can talk.
You can still talk, it's okay.
There are 4 personal stories. My question is, what has each of you learned from your co-panelists? In other words, is there something that was said by the other 3 people that caused you to maybe reinforce your worldview, or resonated with your worldview, or challenged it?
Great question. Great question.
Anyone make an answer?
Sorry guys, so the mic will record your voice, so you need to speak loudly.
Okay.
It's laid out on the floor there, so
Okay.
you really don't need the mic because everyone is such a pleasant audience, it's quiet.
Yeah.
So yes, please speak up.
We don't need
You don't need the mic.
We don't.
No, we'll just speak up.
Just
You don't
speak
have
because it's
to.
not working.
If
I
you
mean,
want
you
to
can.
use it.
Feel free.
I wasn't a plan, but that was my question.
I will say, I will speak to Layhannara's work, because I've heard some of your work before, but I'm not sure I've heard this particular piece, and I really liked it. And I think it's really, so Layhannara writes fiction, I write nonfiction, and fiction has always scared me because you could write about anything.
Yeah.
And I'm really impressed by the specificity of these characters who you are making up, but are clearly rooted in people that seem familiar to both of us, being from Long Beach. And I think I'm just kind of jealous of how open your world is in terms of what you can write and stories you can tell. I'm choosing to write about myself and my family because I like those guardrails of my memories and what I know to be true as structure, but I hope to strive towards this more open-ended plan that you're working with and that a lot of you are as well. So did not challenge my worldview, but definitely opened up how I'm thinking about writing.
I'll respond to that because I'm scared of nonfiction. I feel like we're like scared of the other genre. Come to fiction anytime. No, but I felt like, I'm going to speak to you all too, but I feel like specifically to this now, I think the first time I read that piece, I got the chance to read the full piece. It felt so familiar. It echoed everything I felt about that supermarket and just my experiences there too. And it was very special. And I think it definitely, reinforced for me how important it is to, talk about the textures of our home. And I think writing about it from a nonfiction perspective actually scares the shit out of me. And so I really appreciate that perspective, and also hope to, dabble in that a little bit, but we'll see. I'm scared. But I think for April, I'm also part of the Jew, and I sort of think hearing you, speak to that, and I think, wow, I can really relate to the papaya, so just thinking about details in particular, that I think really made me think about my identity and the ways that I think you speak about it with such, reclaimed authority, because it felt like what was nice was that vulnerability around how hard it was to first think about it and how we've come to it, and I think that was really powerful. And then Vichet, I think being able to kind of hear that verse, was that an excerpt from a play?
It's an excerpt from a book in a play.
An excerpt from a book in a play. Oh my, so meta. So meta. I think just the different genres happening. I love that because I read Queen, and so hearing you read that, but then also hearing one I haven't heard before. I think that openness. Back to what Veasna was saying around genre and the different the dialogue just really came to life, and I'm afraid of dialogue too. Let's be honest, I didn't have very much dialogue in my story. I think those were different ways that I felt really inspired by the form and the way that you all approach your identity to these characters. That felt very alive to me. Your character is you, but that felt very, very rooted.
We have another person who has a question. You can go ahead and speak up.
I'll just speak up. It's fine. Thank you. It's very heartwarming for me to see a room of Cambodian creatives, and I wonder if you could speak, if you feel comfortable, a little bit more about the generation of which your parents came here and immigrated, and how it might have affected your ability to be in a creative art form, whereas their limited scope of professions might have limited so many of our peers or even the younger generation to pursue artistic careers, as opposed to being doctors, lawyers, or engineers, which is what I was posed on me, and being just different from that.
So I grew up very low income, and so I wasn't able to do extracurricular activities, but the one thing I could do was go to my public library. And I think in that way that really shaped me into being a creative and being a writer. Also, I'm a baby of the family, so I have the older siblings that take more of the brunt of it. I think my birth order dictates that also a lot. It's actually funny. My parents never really expected us to be a doctor, engineer, lawyer. They just wanted us to have a college education and be happy. And I think that's just really more informed about what they went through specifically with the war, and how I've seen the effects of I thought my mother is a very smart person, but she only has goes to a secondary education, and I think a lot about what she could have been, and I think that pushes me a lot with my own pursuits of what I want to do in life. I do have a master's degree, but it's in poetry, and I wanted to just do the master's degree because I wanted to pursue more education, because I knew that that's an important thing that is easily taken away. And I think knowing just alternative features from my parents really pushed me into creating, because I want to create alternative features for other people to read my work and say oh, this is a possibility. Being Cambodian American, being a creative is a possibility, being a writer is a possibility.
Yeah, similarly, my parents who are here in the front row, we grew up in a low-income house. I remember growing up, and each family had their own room with my cousins, and we didn't have a lot. You know, my mother would work the night shift, my dad would go to college, and I would have a full-time job. They strung together income. So, you know, my first memory of my parents were that they were tired. They were just always tired because they were grinding so hard, making sure we had resources and food at the table. And I mean, they raised two young men who are now older men who are both in the arts, which is incredibly challenging at times. My mother asked me yesterday if I was making enough money. I said, sure, why not? And I think what I deeply appreciate about my parents and the way they raised me was everything always felt like a conversation. It always felt like they wanted to check on me to make sure I was supporting myself, but they also endowed me with enough trust to know that if I needed help, I would ask for it, which I didn't do often, but that I was also trying to make decisions that felt aligned with what I thought should happen in my life in real time. It's like hard to be an artist. Like, it's like really fucking hard. And like, the truth is, like, I'm constantly trying to pastiche an income together. I'm sorry I'm saying this in front of my parents right now, but I think, there are moments in which I'm like, what am I doing? You know, like I'm trying very hard. I'm trying very hard. And at the same time, I'm inspired by my colleagues. I'm inspired by these moments in which you are being reaffirmed, being pushed along to say, like, you have purpose, and there's something that you're reaching for, the ineffable. I think that ultimately it's like, yes, you have to take care of yourself. That's really important. Like, let's not romanticize the grind, you know? And at the same time, if you feel that sort of internal pull to do it, like, you gotta honor that in some regard, in whatever way makes sense for your own life.
I really appreciate hearing how everyone here has pursued a path of writing, in art making, and essentially meaning making. I think as artists, we choose this path because it makes us feel most human. And so, however you need to tell your stories, however you need to feel more human in this world, in this very brutal world that can still be beautiful and loving and tender, you have to do that. And so that's my answer to your question. And we're going to end the evening right now, but I want to give a huge round of applause to April. Before we mingle a bit and grab some food and wine and drinks, there are 3 of you in the audience who has a pink sticker on the back of your chair. And if you are one of those people, stand up, because we have a surprise giveaway.
We got a surprise giveaway. You get a brush. You get a candle.
I didn't bring it with me.
Yeah, I never would. I'm gonna graffiti the face. Oh wait, you signed mine because I signed yours. That's not gonna be here. I want one of these. I want you to sign it. I think that's better. How much is it?
Before we really end this session, I wanted to just cover the schedule coming up. So there is a flyer on the table with a wine QR code on it to follow the schedule for this next month for the Cambodian Town Film Festival. Please buy tickets because, as Vichet mentioned, the arts and artists, we work, we do things. That's why I am really advocate to pay for artists and speakers because don't ask people to do things for free. Right? Yes. Don't ask people to give things for free. So there you go. So okay, tomorrow, Monica Sok is going to be presenting the open mic. So please come by from 5 to 8. We're going to have time for that as well. The other person I forgot to thank is Dr. Susan Coteen, who also is a community member, and Honey Hatch, who's also a supporting member, and Alan, yes, our staff member, yes. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to give them a certificate, and I have Monica Sok to stand alone, and also Savannah Poole, who is also a Rondeau community member, as well as a Senator Lina Gonzalez, who's a field representative. And, okay, so I'm going to join you.
I do want you to say.
If I can ask the committee members to come up, I see Katie's coming up. So from dual to a few months to plan, maybe even longer because Seance has been on it for quite a while. All of us as community leaders in our own right have contributed to the process. We are now recognizing this as on the city database and on the county database and the state database, right? Because we do that, and this is one of the things people always ask me about certificates. Why do I ask for certificates? I ask certificates from an elected official. One of the reasons I do ask is that I want them to put what we're doing on their radar. And one of the things that as I was a county employee for 36 years, we take pride in the work that we do, and sometimes we don't recognize that the work that we do in the community is tireless work, and sometimes people don't actually recognize it because we don't really get paid. Like some of us are blessed to serve and get paid, and some of us don't. But one of the things that we want to make sure is that when we do events like this, we want our elected official to know. We want them to recognize that we do come together, and you all talk about resilience in so many different forms. It's lightly, they take it lightly when other people say it because they don't really know what that means, right? Yeah.
And we vote.
And we vote. That is true, and we vote. And so they do. So there are some that wanted to be here but cannot. And of course we have Savannah. I'll turn the mic over to Savannah, but I want to present a certificate from Long Beach, 6th District Councilwoman Dr. Sui Sorrow, who is the first Cambodian American female to sit on the council seat and was elected twice. So she's doing amazing work, and we do have, I put it in order so that it's easy, so it goes from the bottom to, and we also have, this is Monica, so it goes, so it's, if we can all maybe just stand up so we can see. And then we also have a certificate and to give us for that, getting a frame. So this is a rule certificate from us, but we also have a certificate from the California State Treasurer, Fiona, who's very supportive of everything that we do for the Asian community because she thinks that everything that we put together gives value to our Asian community. And also our board supervisor, Janice Hahn. Janice Hahn is the biggest supporter of So I wanted to read from Councilwoman Sui Sorrow. So this is.
But
I said we're in the database because they
they have protection and sometimes it's safe and what the specific disease issues is. In recognition of dedicated service to this is on Amazon, the affair of the community and for the civic pride demonstrated by numerous contributions for the benefit of all the residents of Los Angeles County. So sometimes we say we do things in Long Beach and stay in Long Beach. No, it is Los Angeles County, and it is, you know, because there's more Cambodian here in Long Beach, but it is for the Los Angeles County. I wanted to read Councilwoman Superstar Long Beach. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It is. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. So it's Renewal 2025 in recognition of your participation and support of Renewal 2025, the 50th year of remembrance of the Khmer Rouge genocide and celebration of the contribution of the Cambodian American community. Your commitment to honor their lives lost and uplift the survivor is invaluable. On behalf of the 6th District, Councilwoman Sar, Long Beach, thank you for your service. So this is a service. Even though you guys have your own, you know, the work here, what you do here today is you're serving the community. So thank you so much. And then,
Students of Boston, my name is Monica Sok. I'm honored to be here today to not just be a representative for the State Center, but also an honor and privilege committee member for Renewal. But also, I'm a father to 3 beautiful girls, and they're 2 sitting right there, and I want to thank them for their patience and enhancing job duties. But I'm here because I think events like this, I know events like this bring all of us together in the most beautiful ways. You know, we got people from New York City. I have people that are old. You know, I've seen the jet. I haven't seen it in years. But it was so good to see him last night at dinner time and briefly and see how he's doing. But also Monica as well, who's the other working on projects too. So, but I want to say thank you so much for all of you for being here to share your heart, to share your experience, to share your souls as Cambodian Americans to the rest of the community. The senator, her name is Veasna Has, and she's the Senate Majority Leader, which means she's the second in power of the California Senate. She's also the chair of the Latino Caucus as well. And the senator, she oversees over 1 million people in California, which includes all of Long Beach and 13 other states. And my role is to represent her, but also build a deep relationship with our community. And I think she does smart things. She comes from the Khmer community that really loves our people, that really loves our history, that really wants to honor the people that have built the foundation for all of us here today, and for us next generation of Khmer folk to take it and move forward. So thank you so much for having us, and his certificate for all of you. Please, everybody give a round of applause.